The dust hung in the air like a dirty curtain, turning the late afternoon sun into a hazy orange glow over the town of Bitter Creek. It was the kind of day that made everything look old and worn, even the things that weren't. Sarah Jane clutched her rag doll tighter as she sat on the splintered wooden steps outside the saloon, her bare feet covered in the red dirt that seemed to coat everything in this part of Texas. She was 8 years old, though she looked younger, small for her age with tangled blonde hair and eyes that had seen too much for someone who should still believe in fairy tales. Inside the saloon, she could hear her father's voice rising above the others, slurred and angry. It was a sound she knew too well, like the creaking of old floorboards or the whistle of the evening wind. She had learned to read the patterns of his drinking the way other children learn to read books. First came the laughter, loud and false. Then the boasting, telling stories that grew taller with each glass of whiskey. After that came the anger, sudden and unpredictable as a rattlesnake strike. She knew he was reaching that stage now, and she pressed herself smaller against the wall, hoping to become invisible. The saloon doors burst open with a crash that made Sarah Jane jump. Her father stumbled out, his weathered face red and twisted with rage. He was a big man, made bigger by his fury, with hands that had once been gentle but had forgotten how. His boots thudded heavily on the wooden planks as he spotted her huddled there. "What are you still doing here?" he shouted, his words running together like water. "I told you to go home. You're always underfoot, always watching me with those damn eyes of your mother's." Sarah Jane stood up quickly, clutching her doll. "I'm sorry, Papa. I was just waiting for you. I thought we could walk home together." "Home?" He laughed, a harsh sound without any joy in it. "Ain't no home. Just four walls and memories I'm trying to forget. Your mama's gone because of you, you know that. Everything went wrong when you came along." The words hit her like physical blows, but they weren't new. She had heard variations of them countless times since her mother had died bringing her baby brother into the world 3 years ago. A brother who had only lived for 2 days, leaving her father with nothing but a bottle and a daughter who reminded him of everything he had lost. "Papa, please," she whispered, but he wasn't listening anymore. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip too tight, and dragged her down the steps. People on the street stopped and stared, but no one moved to help. That was the way of things in Bitter Creek. Everyone had their own troubles, and a drunk and his daughter were just another sad story in a town full of them. "You want to see your mama so bad," he said, pulling her along the dusty street. "Maybe you should go join her. I can't do this anymore. Can't look at you anymore." They reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and the road stretched out toward nothing. He released her arm with such force that she stumbled and fell, the dust rising around her like a cloud. Her doll flew from her hands and landed a few feet away. "Don't come back," he said, his voice suddenly quiet, almost sad. "I mean it this time, Sarah Jane, just go. Go anywhere. I got nothing left to give you." She looked up at him from the ground, tears making clean tracks down her dirty face. For just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been regret or love or just exhaustion. But then he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched, heading back toward the saloon and the only comfort he knew anymore. Sarah Jane sat there in the dust for a long time after he disappeared, not crying anymore, just breathing and trying to understand what she was supposed to do now. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky in shades of red and purple that would have been beautiful if she had any room left inside her to notice beauty. She retrieved her doll and stood up, brushing ineffectively at her worn dress. She had no shoes, no food, no plan. She was 8 years old and alone in a place that ate up the weak and forgot about them. She started walking away from town, not because she had anywhere to go, but because staying still felt like dying. The road stretched before her, 2 ruts in the dirt that went on forever. Her feet hurt and her stomach was empty, but she kept walking because it was all she could think to do. The sky darkened from purple to deep blue, and the first stars began to appear like pinpricks in a blanket. The temperature dropped quickly the way it did in the desert, and she had no shawl, no coat, nothing but her thin dress and the doll that had been her constant companion since her mother had made it for her 4th birthday. She walked until she couldn't walk anymore, until her legs simply refused to carry her further. She collapsed beside the road near a twisted Joshua tree, its strange branches reaching up toward the stars like arms raised in prayer or surrender. She curled up against its trunk, shivering, and closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, tried to remember her face, her voice, the way she used to sing Sarah Jane to sleep. The memories were getting fuzzy around the edges, fading like old photographs left too long in the sun. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, there was light pressing against her eyelids and the sound of horses. She opened her eyes slowly, confused by the bright morning sun. A wagon had stopped on the road, and a man was climbing down from the driver's seat. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn rancher's clothes, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same weathered wood as the fence posts that dotted the landscape. He had gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that were the color of the sky before a storm. "Child," he said, his voice gentle. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Sarah Jane tried to stand, but her legs were stiff and sore. She managed to sit up, clutching her doll defensively. "I'm going somewhere," she said, though she had no idea where. The man crouched down so he was at her eye level. He didn't crowd her, didn't reach for her, just waited patiently. That's a mighty big somewhere for such a small person to be heading toward. "You got folks around here?" She shook her head, then stopped, confused. Did she have folks? Her father had told her not to come back. Did that mean she didn't have a father anymore? "I see," the man said, as if she had answered a question she hadn't been asked. "Well, I can't rightly leave a little girl out here by herself. Coyotes come out at night, and worse things than coyotes sometimes. My name's Nathaniel Hayes. I got a ranch about 5 miles west of here. You hungry?" At the mention of food, Sarah Jane's stomach cramped with hunger so fierce it made her gasp. She nodded. "Come on then," Nathaniel said, standing up and offering his hand. "Let's get you something to eat, and then we can figure out what's what." She hesitated, her father's warnings about strangers echoing in her head. But those warnings had come from a man who had just thrown her away like she was garbage. And besides, what choice did she have? She took Nathaniel's hand. His grip was warm and steady, and he helped her up gently, as if she might break. He lifted her onto the wagon's seat as easily as if she weighed nothing, then climbed up beside her. There were supplies in the back, sacks of grain and flour, tools and lumber. He clicked his tongue and the horses started moving, their hooves making a steady rhythm on the packed dirt road. "That's a nice doll you got there," Nathaniel said after they had ridden in silence for a while. "She got a name? Rose?" Sarah Jane said quietly. "Mama made her." "Your mama must have been good with a needle." "That's fine stitching." "She was good at everything," Sarah Jane said, her voice catching. "She could cook and sew and sing, and she always smelled like bread and flowers. She died when I was 5. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said, and the way he said it made Sarah Jane believe he really was. "That's a hard thing for a child to bear. What about your papa?" Sarah Jane looked down at her hands, at the doll clutched in her lap. "He drinks. He says I remind him too much of her. Yesterday he said not to come back. Said he can't look at me anymore." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, and when Sarah Jane glanced up at his face, she saw his jaw was tight and his eyes looked sad. "Some men," he said finally, "they don't know how to hold on to the good things. They let grief or anger or the bottle take hold of them, and they forget what matters. That doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it your fault. You understand me, child? Nothing that's happened is your fault." The words broke something open inside her, something that had been locked up tight for 3 long years. She started to cry, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Nathaniel pulled the wagon to a stop and just let her cry, not trying to hush her or fix it, just sitting there steady and solid beside her until the storm passed. When she finally quieted, he handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. It was clean and smelled like soap and leather. She wiped her face with it, embarrassed. "Nothing wrong with crying," Nathaniel said. "Sometimes it's the only sensible thing to do. You hold on to that handkerchief, I got others." They rode on, and gradually the landscape began to change. There were more trees here, scrub oak and cottonwoods, and in the distance Sarah Jane could see green pastures and cattle grazing. They turned off the main road onto a smaller track, and soon she could see buildings, a house, a barn, corrals, and outbuildings. It was a real ranch, the kind she had only seen from a distance. The house was simple but well kept, made of wood with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There were curtains in the windows and flowers growing in a garden beside the front steps. It looked like a home, not just a place to sleep. A woman came out onto the porch as they pulled up. She was small and sturdy, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and an apron tied around her waist. Her face was kind but weathered, like she had known hard work and hadn't complained about it. Nathaniel, she called, wiping her hands on her apron. You're back early. I wasn't expecting you until... She trailed off as she noticed Sarah Jane, and her expression changed from curiosity to concern. Who's this? Found her sleeping beside the road about 5 miles east. Nathaniel said, climbing down from the wagon. She's had a rough time of it. This is Sarah Jane. Sarah Jane, this is my wife, Margaret. Margaret came down the steps quickly and stood looking at Sarah Jane with eyes that seemed to see everything: the dirty dress, the bare feet, the way the child was holding herself like she might need to run at any moment.
Oh, you poor lamb,
Margaret said softly. Let's get you inside and fed. You look half-starved. Sarah Jane climbed down from the wagon with Nathaniel's help, and Margaret put a gentle arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the house. The touch was so motherly, so full of uncomplicated kindness, that Sarah Jane felt tears threatening again. Inside, the house was clean and cozy, with rag rugs on the wooden floors and the smell of baking bread filling the air. Margaret sat Sarah Jane down at a large kitchen table and immediately began bustling around, putting food in front of her: bread and butter, cold chicken, a glass of milk, an apple. Sarah Jane stared at the bounty, hardly believing it was real. Go on, Margaret encouraged. Eat as much as you want. Sarah Jane ate slowly at first, then faster as her hunger overcame her manners. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a full meal. Margaret and Nathaniel watched her with expressions that mixed sadness and something else. Something that looked almost like anger, though Sarah Jane sensed it wasn't directed at her. When she finally couldn't eat another bite, Margaret took her hand. Now let's get you cleaned up. I'll heat some water for a bath, and we'll see about finding you some proper clothes and shoes. The bath was warm and soothing, and Margaret was gentle as she washed Sarah Jane's hair and scrubbed away the layers of dirt. She found a nightgown that was too big but clean and soft, and she combed out Sarah Jane's tangled hair with patient fingers that didn't pull or hurt. By the time she was done, Sarah Jane felt like a different person, or maybe like herself again, a self she had forgotten existed. That night, Margaret put her to bed in a small room with a real mattress and quilts that smelled like sunshine. Sarah Jane clutched Rose and looked up at the woman standing in the doorway. Are you going to take me back to town tomorrow? She asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Margaret came and sat on the edge of the bed. Is that what you want? Sarah Jane shook her head. Then you'll stay here with us, Margaret said simply. As long as you need to. As long as you want to. We've got plenty of room and plenty of love to share. Our own children are grown and gone, started their own families out California way. This house has been too quiet for too long. But my papa, Sarah Jane started. Your papa made a choice, Margaret said, her voice firm but not unkind. And maybe someday he'll come to his senses and want to make things right. But until then, you're safe here. You're wanted here. Do you understand? Sarah Jane nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good, Margaret said, smoothing the quilt over her. Now you sleep. Tomorrow's a new day, and there's always work to be done on a ranch. We'll find things for you to do, things that'll make you feel useful and strong. You're gonna be just fine, Sarah Jane. I promise you that. She bent down and kissed Sarah Jane's forehead, something no one had done since her mother died, and then she left, pulling the door almost closed but leaving it open just enough that a slice of light fell across the floor. Sarah Jane lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the trees. For the first time in 3 years, she felt safe. For the first time since her mother died, she felt like maybe she could belong somewhere. She closed her eyes and slept deeply, dreamlessly. The sleep of a child who didn't have to worry about what tomorrow would bring. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Sarah Jane learned the rhythms of ranch life, waking early to help Margaret with breakfast, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, learning to garden and cook and sew. Nathaniel taught her to ride, starting her on an old gentle mare named Daisy. He showed her the boundaries of the ranch, taught her the names of all the cattle, explained how to read the weather and the land. He treated her with the same patient respect he showed everyone, never raising his voice, never impatient with her questions. Margaret became the mother she had lost, teaching her not just practical skills but also reading and writing, history and arithmetic. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and Margaret would read aloud from books, opening up worlds Sarah Jane had never imagined. She learned about far-off places and brave heroes, about people who overcame impossible odds and found their way home. The ranch hands accepted her presence without question. There was old Carlos who managed the horses, and young Tommy who was learning the trade, and a dozen others who came and went with the seasons. They nodded to her respectfully, sometimes brought her small gifts: a smooth stone from the creek, a feather from a hawk, a carved wooden horse. She was part of the ranch now, part of the family that Nathaniel and Margaret had built through hard work and kindness. She didn't forget her father. Sometimes she would dream about him, and she would wake with tears on her face. But the dreams became less frequent as time passed, and the pain became something she could carry without it crushing her. Margaret told her once that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing. It meant letting go of the weight so you could walk forward unburdened. Sarah Jane tried to understand, and gradually she did. One day in late autumn, almost a year after Nathaniel had found her by the side of the road, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Sarah Jane was in the garden pulling up the last of the summer vegetables when she heard the horse. She looked up and saw a man dismounting near the house, and her heart stopped. Even at a distance, even though he looked thinner and older, she recognized him. It was her father. She stood frozen, a carrot dangling from her hand, dirt on her knees. Nathaniel came out of the barn and walked over to meet the man. They talked for a long time, too far away for Sarah Jane to hear their words. She saw her father gesturing, his hat in his hands, his head bowed. She saw Nathaniel listening, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Then Nathaniel turned and looked toward the garden, toward her. He walked over slowly, giving her time to see him coming. When he reached her, he crouched down beside her the way he had that first day. "That's your father," he said. "He's come a long way to see you. Says he's been sober for 6 months, working hard, trying to make something of himself. Says he wants to apologize. Wants to try to be the father you deserve. But Sarah Jane, you don't have to see him if you don't want to. You don't owe him anything. This is your choice." Sarah Jane looked past Nathaniel to where her father stood, small and uncertain in the yard. He did look different, cleaner, more like the man she dimly remembered from before her mother died. But looks could be deceiving and words could be lies. "What should I do?" she asked Nathaniel. "I can't tell you that," he said gently. "But I can tell you this: whatever you decide, you're still our girl. If you want to hear what he has to say, Margaret and I will be right there with you. If you want to send him away, we'll do that too. And if someday you decide you want to try again with him, give him another chance, we'll support that. But you'll always have a home here, Sarah Jane. Always. That's not going to change no matter what." Sarah Jane thought about it, her heart pounding. She thought about all the pain, all the nights sleeping in doorways while her father drank away what little money they had. She thought about the day he threw her away like she was nothing. But she also thought about what Margaret had said about forgiveness, about not carrying weight that would keep her from moving forward. And she thought about the man she had loved once, the father who had held her hand and told her stories before grief broke him. "I'll talk to him," she said finally. "But I want you and Margaret there." "Of course," Nathaniel said, standing and offering her his hand. They walked together across the yard. Margaret came out of the house and joined them, standing on Sarah Jane's other side, a small protective wall of love and support. Her father watched them approach, and Sarah Jane could see tears on his weathered face. When they were close enough, he dropped to his knees in the dust, bringing himself down to her level. "Sarah Jane," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I got no right to come here. I know I did you wrong in ways I can't ever make up for. I was drowning in my own pain and I took you down with me. I threw away the most precious thing I had left of your mama. I've been sober for 6 months now, working up the courage to come find you to tell you I'm sorry. To tell you that none of it was your fault. You hear me? None of it." Sarah Jane looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the regret in his eyes, the shame, the desperate hope. She saw a broken man trying to put himself back together. And she realized that she had a choice to make, not for him but for herself. She could hold on to the anger and the hurt, let it make her bitter and hard. Or she could let it go, take the best parts of what she had learned from her pain, and move forward. "I forgive you, Papa," she said, and she meant it. The words felt like opening a window in a stuffy room, letting fresh air rush in. "I forgive you, but I'm not ready to come back with you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm happy here. I'm learning things and growing strong. Nathaniel and Margaret, they've given me a home." Her father nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. That I love you. That I'm trying to be better. If you ever want to see me, I'm working at the lumber mill in Coopersville, about 30 miles east. I'm saving money, getting a little house together. You're welcome anytime, if you ever want to come. But I understand if you don't. Maybe someday, Sarah Jane said. But not yet. He reached out slowly and she let him take her hand. He held it gently, as if it were something precious and fragile. You look good, he said. Healthy and happy. Your mama would be proud of the girl you're becoming. I'm proud too, though I got no right to be. You can be proud, Sarah Jane said. Nathaniel says pride in someone else's accomplishments is one of the best kinds of pride there is. Her father looked up at Nathaniel and Margaret, standing protectively behind Sarah Jane. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Thank you for taking care of my girl when I couldn't, when I wouldn't. There ain't words big enough for that kind of gratitude. Love her, Nathaniel said simply. That's all the thanks we need. Love her and be the father she deserves, and we'll consider ourselves well thanked. Her father nodded, standing up slowly. He looked at Sarah Jane one more time, trying to memorize her face. Then he put his hat back on and walked to his horse. He mounted up and looked back at them. All right, he said. If that's all right. Just to let you know how I'm doing, let you know I'm still on the straight path. No pressure for you to write back. Just so you know I'm thinking of you. I'd like that, Sarah Jane said, surprising herself. He smiled then, a real smile, the first one she could remember seeing in years. Then he turned his horse and rode away, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. Margaret put her hand on Sarah Jane's shoulder. You did good, child. That took courage. I meant what I said, Sarah Jane told them, turning to look at both Nathaniel and Margaret. About being happy here. About this being my home. You've given me more than I ever dreamed of having. You've taught me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to love you and stand by you. That's what you've done for me, and you've given us just as much, Margaret said, pulling her into a hug. You brought life back into this house, joy back into our days. Love is like that, Sarah Jane. It multiplies when you share it, never divides. That night at dinner, Sarah Jane sat between Nathaniel and Margaret at the big kitchen table. The one that had seemed so enormous that first day, but now felt just right. They talked about the day's work and plans for tomorrow. About the cattle that would need to be moved to winter pasture, and the preserves that needed to be put up before the cold weather came. They talked about ordinary things in the way that families do, finding comfort in the routine and rhythm of shared life. After dinner, Margaret read from a new book, one about a girl who went on adventures and learned to be brave. Sarah Jane listened, her head on Margaret's shoulder, Rose the doll tucked under her arm. Nathaniel sat in his chair by the fire, mending a bridle, occasionally looking up to meet Margaret's eyes and smile. Later, when Margaret tucked her into bed, Sarah Jane held onto her hand. Do you think people can really change? She asked. Like my papa. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, thinking carefully before she answered. I think people can change if they truly want to, she said. If they're willing to do the hard work, face their demons, and keep choosing to be better every single day. It's not easy and it's not guaranteed, but it's possible. Your father seems like he's trying. Whether he succeeds or not, that's up to him. But you giving him the chance to show you he's changing, that was generous. Just remember, you don't owe him anything. Any relationship you build with him now, that's a gift you choose to give, not a debt you have to pay. I understand, Sarah Jane said. And Margaret, thank you for everything. Sweet dreams. My darling girl, Margaret whispered, kissing her forehead. As Sarah Jane drifted off to sleep, she thought about the strange path her life had taken. A year ago, she had been lost and alone, thrown away by the person who should have protected her. She had believed she was worthless, that maybe her father was right and everything bad that happened was somehow her fault. But Nathaniel and Margaret had shown her something different. They had shown her that she was valuable, that she was worthy of love and care and patience. They had given her a home not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She thought about the little girl who had sat on those saloon steps, clutching a rag doll and wondering how she would survive. That girl had been broken, but she had also been stronger than she knew. She had kept walking even when she wanted to give up. She had accepted kindness when it was offered. She had learned to trust again, to hope again, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. The months continued to pass, turning into years. Sarah Jane grew from a small, scared child into a capable young woman. She learned everything Nathaniel and Margaret could teach her about ranching and running a household. She learned to rope cattle and break horses, to read the weather and heal sick animals. She learned to cook and preserve food, to sew and manage accounts. But more than any practical skill, she learned about kindness and resilience, about the kind of love that doesn't keep score or hold grudges. Her father wrote regularly, true to his word. At first, Sarah Jane only read the letters with Margaret beside her, sometimes putting them away without responding. But gradually, as the letters kept coming, as they showed a man consistently working to be better, she began to write back. Short notes at first, then longer letters. They were careful with each other, rebuilding trust slowly, one careful brick at a time. 3 years after that first day in the garden, Sarah Jane rode with Nathaniel to Coopersville to visit her father. She had been nervous, but she had wanted to go. She found him living in a small but tidy house, working steady at the lumber mill, attending church on Sundays. He showed her around his house with shy pride, pointing out the room he had set up for her in case she ever wanted to visit longer. It had a real bed and curtains and a bookshelf waiting to be filled. They spent the afternoon together, talking more easily than they ever had before. He told her about his work, about the friends he had made in his church group, about how hard it was some days to stay sober, but how he did it anyway. She told him about the ranch, about the new foal that had been born in spring, about the book Margaret was helping her read. When it was time to leave, he hugged her, and she hugged him back, and for the first time it didn't hurt. "I'm proud of you, Sarah Jane," he said. "You grew up strong and good despite me, not because of me. That's all you, and it's all Nathaniel and Margaret. But I'm grateful I get to see it, that you're giving me this chance." "I'm proud of you too, Papa," she said, "for fighting your way back. That takes a different kind of strength." She visited him every few months after that, and each time it got a little easier. He would never be the father he had been before her mother died, and she would never forget the pain he had caused. But they built something new, a relationship based not on obligation or need, but on choice and forgiveness. It was fragile and imperfect, but it was real. Through it all, the ranch remained her home, and Nathaniel and Margaret remained her true parents, the ones who had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but need. They celebrated her birthdays with cakes and small presents. They taught her to dance for the town socials. They held her when she cried over her first heartbreak, and cheered when she won the blue ribbon at the county fair for her apple preserves. They were there for all the big moments and all the small ones, steady and constant as the sun rising every morning. On her 16th birthday, Nathaniel called her into his study. It was a small room lined with books and papers, a place where he managed the business of the ranch. He gestured for her to sit down, and she did, curious. "Sarah Jane," he said, "Margaret and I have been talking, and we want to make something official. We want to adopt you properly, legal and all. Make you our daughter not just in our hearts but on paper too. Give you our name if you want it. You'd be Sarah Jane Hayes. What do you think about that?" Sarah Jane felt tears spring to her eyes, the good kind that came from joy so big it couldn't be contained. "I'd like that," she managed to say. "I'd like that more than anything." And so it was done. A lawyer came out from town with papers, and Sarah Jane signed her name in careful script, making it official. She was Sarah Jane Hayes, daughter of Nathaniel and Margaret, heir to a ranch and a legacy of love that was worth more than gold. Years later, long after she was grown and running the ranch herself, after Nathaniel had passed peacefully in his sleep, and Margaret had followed him a few years later, Sarah Jane would sit on the porch in the evenings and remember. She would think about that little girl thrown away by her drunk father, sleeping under a Joshua tree and believing she had nothing. She would think about the stranger who had stopped his wagon and offered her a hand, asking for nothing in return except that she let herself be loved. She never forgot where she came from or how close she had come to being lost forever, but she also never let that pain define her. Instead, she let it teach her compassion for others who were struggling. She opened her home to children who needed a place to stay, hired men and women who were down on their luck and needed a second chance. She became known throughout the county as someone who would help anyone who truly wanted to help themselves, just as she had been helped all those years ago. And sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the stars were bright overhead, she would hold Rose the doll, worn now but still treasured. and whisper thank you to the universe that had brought Nathaniel Hayes down that road on that particular morning. Thank you for the stranger who had seen a child in need and hadn't looked away. Thank you for the life she had been given, the love she had received, and the chance to pass it forward to others. She had been thrown away once, discarded like she didn't matter. But she had learned that one person's rejection didn't define her worth. She had learned that family was built through choice and commitment, not just blood. She had learned that the worst thing that ever happened to her had also led her to the best thing, a home where she was valued, loved, and given the chance to become exactly who she was meant to be. And in the end, that made all the difference.